Surprise! I got another vest on. That vest swag is important. Anywho, I'm Harrison101 and welcome back to the team reviews, this time for the 2013 Formula 1 season. People seem to enjoy this series last time around, so I thought I'd bring it back for 2013 because, again, you guys seem to enjoy it so much. Bit of a different format this time around. Instead of me doing one video per team like I did last season, I'm going to group them more together this time around. And the reason why I'm doing that is because if I was to do this video by video, given my current schedule, seriously, I'd be here until the middle of March talking about last season, when we talk mainly about getting hyped for the season that's upcoming, which I think starts March 28th, 2014. So overall, I thought I wanted to group these videos more together in kind of a block so I can get them out of the way faster and you guys can enjoy them quicker. So in this first episode of the team reviews, I'm going to be looking at three teams, the top three: Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari. Episode 2 will be the team in the middle four, so that will be Lotus, McLaren, Force India and Sauber. And then in the last episode, we'll be looking at Toro Rosso, Williams, Caterham and Marussia. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to give grades at the end of each individual team, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And I hope you guys enjoy it. If you enjoy the video, please leave a like, and I will catch you guys next time. Sayonara. Okay, let's talk about Red Bull first. The reigning World Drivers and Constructors Champions, all at the same unit once again for the fourth straight season. Let's be real here, Red Bull's probably been the best team in Formula 1 for the last four and a half seasons now. And once again, it's just their track record is absolutely immense, and they are still the team to beat in Formula 1, and Sebastian Vettel is still the driver to beat. Talking about Vettel, I'm only going to keep this one brief really, because everything that's been said about him already has probably already been said by somebody else, but running down the numbers here: 13 race wins, 16 times on the podium, 9 times in pole position, 9 race wins in a row the second half of the season, scored a new points record with 397. He won the Constructors' Championship by himself. And he was the best qualifier on the field. He would have had a 400-point year if it wasn't for the British Grand Prix and his gearbox failing. Did not finish any given Grand Prix any lower than 4th this season. And that was earlier on in the year, when Vettel had 1, a bad qualifying session, and 2, a race where Red Bull tried him on a three-stopper and it didn't work out for him. So Vettel could not have done much more if he tried this season. He was impeccable this year. And let's be real here, it's an A+ grade for Sebastian Vettel, because quite frankly, anything less wouldn't be doing his season justice. I mean, he was so much better than everybody else this year. He was in another league compared to everybody else, and he was just absolutely insane. I'm not going to say anything about his legacy just yet, because I know it will piss people off like I did in my top 5 video, saying he wasn't an all-time hit because of his car. I could shoot that argument down in a second if I wanted to, but we'll move on. Let's talk about Mark Webber. Mark Webber had 199 points, finished 3rd in the World Drivers' Championship, and a decent season to close out his campaign. 8 times he finished on the podium. Strangely, he didn't win a Grand Prix this year, which is kind of a shame, because Webber, despite the fact he's not as good as Sebastian and hasn't been since 2010, he was always good for a race win or two. Maybe he was robbed of one during Malaysia and Multi-21, but that's a story for another video. 8 podiums. Twice he finished in pole, which was nice to see as well. The Abu Dhabi pole definitely stuck out in my mind as something to say, yeah, Webber's still got something to give. Even if I believe his racecraft and his race pace over the course of the season was nowhere near as good as Sebastian's. He was always harder on his tyres than Sebastian was. And more often than not, he would sink and feud in that second tier of guys like the Lotuses, the Mercedes, the Ferraris of the world. And it showed. I mean, 8 times he finished worse than in his qualifying result. I'm not saying that was totally his fault. He had a fair few mechanical issues. He had a fair few KERS failures during Grand Prix, which probably didn't help his chances at all. Losing maybe a couple of attempts, 3/10 of a second a lap, or losing that tactical advantage that KERS gives you. But overall, I think Mark Webber was still pretty solid this year. I mean, he had a lower down season than I thought he would. And maybe if he was a little bit luckier in terms of his mechanical reliability, he may have been able to give Alonso a half-decent challenge for second this year, which Would have been nice because Webber's, I don't think he's even ever finished second in a Drivers' Championship before. I think he's finished third 3 times now. So it's just unfortunate for Webber more than anything else because the guy is capable of good things. And, you know, he's leaving Formula 1 gracefully, I could say, because he had a very good season this year. He was the best of the rest compared to the top 2. And that deserves some praise. As for the car, well, we all know Red Bull are the best developers of a car in Formula 1, and maybe not to start out with. Maybe they don't. I don't think they ever always have the best opening package right out from the gate. Maybe except for 2011 a little bit, but what they do better than any other team is they develop the car over the course of the season. They work out where their weaknesses are, they work out where they're struggling, and they come up with a way of fixing it. And that's what makes Red Bull the team they are today. And that is what's made Red Bull the best team in Formula 1 over the last 4.5 seasons or so. It's their in-season development and the way they change the car during the course of the season is what makes them so strong. Start of the year, they weren't the best qualifiers. Mercedes had astonishing one-lap pace, and the Red Bull seemed to struggle for top speed. Later on in the year, they got around that problem. They fixed their top speed problems. They were able to win in tracks they don't normally win at, like Canada and like in Monza and like in Spa. Tracks where you need a higher top speed to really, you know, maximize your car's performance and potential during the course of the season. Their reliability still wasn't the best. I mean, they had multiple gearbox failures. They had moments where they were trying to nurse their drivers home, like Vettel in Monza, Webber in Singapore, and that obviously failed spectacularly. And they had multiple KERS failures over the course of the season, definitely more than any other team on the grid, which is still a concern because often that would take points away or often compromise them. I mean, they probably could have had a 600-point constructor season if it wasn't for those issues like the gearbox failure in Britain, there's the water pump failure for Webber in Singapore, and obviously multiple KERS failures across the board over the course of the season. But overall, Red Bull's improvement and be able to dominate and take away their weaknesses and just cripple the other teams on the field is what makes them so strong. And that is why Red Bull are definitely my team of the year, and Sebastian Vettel was my driver of the year. Overall, pretty much invincible Red Bull. Can anyone stop this team? Next up we have Ferrari and how their season fared. Bit of a mixed bag all in on this one. First up, let's talk about perennial top level contender Fernando Alonso. Now, I'm going to be honest here, people, and I don't normally admit this on camera, but I will. I was wrong on Fernando Alonso this year. A lot of people called foul on me when I didn't put him in my top 5, but when I looked at the stats a little bit deeper, like I normally do with these things, and when I broke it down a little bit more, and when I started making comparisons, I realised that Fernando Alonso probably still had a really, really good season in the grand scheme of things. And I was wrong. And I apologise to any and all Alonso fans that took issue with him not being in my top 5. He probably should have been in my top 5. Maybe as a 4 or as a 3 over Hulkenberg. Overall, yeah, I can't believe I just admitted that on camera. Moving on, Alonso scored 242 points last year. For second in the World Drivers' Championship. The third time in 4 years Alonso has finished in second place. On paper, you'd think he'd have a worse year than last year. Only had 2 race wins compared to 4, only on the podium 9 times compared to 13 last season. But when you look at things a little bit deeper, you realise he still had a really good year. There's a few things you've got to consider. Number 1, Mercedes were on an equal, if not better, footing to Ferrari for most of the season. Number 2, Lotus had 2 consistent top-level runners in Formula 1 this year compared to 1. Because you have to remember, Romain Grosjean was a huge boost to the Lotus team this year compared to last year. Grosjean's points towards the end of the year almost took Lotus over the top for 3rd or maybe even 2nd in the Constructors' Championship. So the field from maybe 3rd down to 7th or 8th was a lot closer compared to last year. Despite all this, Alonso still finished 12 out of 19 races higher than where he qualified, and actually improved as a qualifier, which I still believe is the ultimate weakness in Fernando Alonso's game, is that he hasn't got ultimate pace, and he's never been a particularly strong qualifier. like a Hamilton, a Vettel, or even a Nico Rosberg. He was out-qualified 8 times by Massa over the course of the season, but he got his average grid starting spot down from 8 down to 6 this year. He was much more consistent as a P3 runner, as a Q3 runner, and as a qualifier in general. And maybe Ferrari was a little bit weakened by the Pirelli tyre change mid-season, but despite that, Alonso finished nearly 50 points ahead of Mark Webber, who had the best car on the grid this season, and that is still an impressive display of what Alonso can do as a driver at this level, despite the fact he's getting up there in age a little bit now at 32, and despite his moaning a little bit that he's not got a same car as Red Bull, despite Ferrari's limitless spending. I'll talk about that in a minute. Alonso still proved he is the second best driver in Formula 1 at worst, and again, it was another really impressive season from Alonso. It's just a shame that Sebastian Vettel is just a little bit better in every way. He's a little bit of a better qualifier. He's a slightly better race manager. Maybe Alonso's racecraft is a little bit better. And again, like I said, 12 times he finished higher than where he qualified, so he had to work harder for his points. But Vettel's an elite qualifier, so it kind of cancels out. But overall, Alonso still had a very impressive season. So if any fans have issue with me not putting him as your number one guy, I apologise. Anywho, talking about Felipe Massa for a second. Felipe Massa had the one podium in Spain, had 112 points. 7 times he finished lower than where he qualified, despite the fact he out-qualified his teammate Massa. So his teammate Alonso, I should say. On several occasions, Massa always failed to make it pay. Now, I don't know how much of that is down to just the Ferrari pecking order in general of, Massa playing the support role for Fernando Alonso. But Massa, again, I think was largely unimpressive. And I can't help but shake the feeling of, if you put another guy in that car, someone who is a little bit more comfortable and experienced, like a Nico Hülkenberg, like he was going to get the Ferrari seat earlier this year, I can't help but get the feeling he would have done better. And like I said, Massa just looked largely unimpressive to me. It looked like Massa as a guy at the top, he seems to have run out. He seems to have just run out of speed at the top of and he's not a top tier guy in Formula 1 anymore, and probably hasn't been for a season and a half or 2 now. And it's kind of a shame because Felipe Massa is one of the most likable guys in Formula 1, but at the same time, his days of running at the top of this sport are pretty much over. And at least he now gets a chance to see what he can do with a lower down team, see if he can bring Williams up into contention a little bit more. Obviously, we'll be talking more about that in a future video. But I think it was hard to justify keeping Felipe Massa in the Ferrari seat last year, let alone this year, where he was even worse than when he was in 2012. So Massa, for me, overall looked very underwhelming. As for the car seemed to be very similar to last year. A lot of people were telling me, oh, the car was bad. It wasn't that bad. It was just the rest of the field was more competitive this year. McLaren threw away so many points last year that third was probably a better reflection of the Ferrari of last year than second, because they ended up finishing second in the Constructors last year with 400 points. This year they only scored 350 or so. And again, I think that was mainly down to a more competitive Mercedes team more than Ferrari looking worse. I don't think they were that much worse than last year. I think Alonso kind of threw in the towel a little bit towards the end of this season, I should say. But Ferrari's car, I think, was very similar to last year's in terms of major nuances. Struggled for ultimate pace, always decent to strong during the race, always very reliable, doesn't break down, will get your driver over the line pretty much regardless. They had one DRS failure in Bahrain, and that was pretty much it for the year. Their race pace was always strong, decent, always second or third really amongst teams. Alonso was always dragging that car to better things than what it probably really was. But at least it wasn't blowing up and having retirements or having failures like Mercedes did further up the field. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, overall, Ferrari, another solid but underwhelming season. You kind of have to wonder, if you're Stefano Domenicali, how many times can you really say we'll get better next year? Let's look at the runners-up for the season, Mercedes. Now, I think the reason why Mercedes ended up being in second was because they had 2 really good drivers compared to the rest of the field this year. Ferrari was always held back by Felipe Massa, while Lotus didn't quite get enough in the end from Romain Grosjean early on, and probably from Kimi Raikkonen later on. But Mercedes had the two consistent high-level scorers throughout the course of the season, and that's probably what got them second place in the Constructors over Ferrari, which is a huge boost for the Mercedes team, despite internal dramas and controversy. I'll talk more about that again in a minute. First up, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton was probably the most consistent he's been in his career this year. He had one race win, 5 podiums in total, 14 times he finished in the top 5 of a Grand Prix this season for 189 points, finishing 4th in the World Drivers' Championship. 5 times he qualified on pole as well. Now, it was kind of like a mini tale of 2 seasons with Lewis Hamilton. The first half of the year, he was looking really, really good. And I remember after he won in Hungary, people were saying that, oh, Lewis Hamilton's going to take the fight to Vettel and Hamilton's our only hope. That kind of dynamic that was going on after he beat Vettel straight up in Hungary, and people were saying that Hamilton was the biggest threat to the title. Then Belgium happened, and then Mercedes got blown out of the water, and since then he just wasn't quite at his best. His form was a little bit shakier. He had dropped out of the top 5 here and there. Rosberg seemed to be outracing him a little bit here and there as well. Maybe part of that was down to the broken chassis Hamilton had in his car, which again I'll mention when I talk about the car in a little bit. But Hamilton just didn't look the same after that Belgian Grand Prix. Maybe it was the girlfriend situation. I don't know what was going on there. But I think Hamilton was still, to have 190 points or so, and to carry over a similar total from what he had last year at McLaren, is a testament to just how good a driver he really is. Because going into a new team straight away and beating your teammate and a guy that's been an established part of the Mercedes regrouping process for some time, who had his best season in Formula 1 by a country mile this year as well, is a testament to how great Lewis Hamilton really is as a driver. And to me, I think he deserves top credit for that, because going into a new team and finding success immediately is difficult, especially because Hamilton was playing down his team's chances almost the entire season. But Mercedes overall never looked out of it. You know, when you have a really fast car and Hamilton's combination of being an elite qualifier in Formula 1, good things will happen, and good things did happen with Hamilton. So credit where credit is due. I think Hamilton did a really good job to come in and do what he did at Mercedes this season, and was able to have probably his most consistent season to date. And I think he's got a really good base to build on for next year. And if Mercedes have a decent engine, then look out, Hamilton could easily get up there again. Now, talking about his teammate Nico Rosberg. Rosberg had, by a country mile, his best season in Formula 1 to date. 2 race wins around Monaco and Great Britain. 3 times he qualified on pole position, and 4 times he ended up on the podium for a total of 171 points, which amazingly put him 6th in the Drivers' Championship. I mean, we have 171 points to put you that far down the order. Rosberg seemed to be the ideal, equal driver, fair with Hamilton, the ideal number 2. Rosberg was willing to listen to team orders in Malaysia, was willing to play that support role like he almost always has in his F1 career, alongside, when you alongside guys like Michael Schumacher, you kind of build around Schumacher rather than Rosberg, which is just kind of an unfortunate inevitability of Formula 1. But I think Rosberg was easily robbed of a shot of overtaking Hamilton in the World Drivers' Championships if it wasn't for the reliability of his car, because Mercedes had 3 mechanical issues over the course of the season, and they were all in Rosberg's car, unfortunately, and that probably took him away a chance of getting maybe 20-30 points or so, and that could have given him a 200-point season and maybe even a top 3 in the Drivers' Championship. So you could argue, and there is an argument there, that Rosberg could have also got into my top 5, and then he could have also, beaten Hamilton over the course of the season. He was a little bit unlucky from that aspect, but I think Rosberg showed great improvement, worked alongside with the car, got the best out of it in qualifying, and often, he would sink a little bit in races here and there, but the second half of the season, Rosberg looked a bit stronger, and overall, I think their seasons are pretty identical, Hamilton and Rosberg, very, very similar. and very close running overall. And you know what? That's what Mercedes needed. They needed some consistency in their team after 2012 had mechanical retirements and disappointment everywhere. This was a great base for Mercedes to build on for next year. However, I am taking 2 subgrades off the team's overall grade, and the reason why is because of Tiregate. And quite frankly, Mercedes broke the rules. They were obviously they're holding a legal test early in the year, got a ton of extra run time, so that they were way ahead of the curve in terms of car development and knowing how their car was working and knowing what they could do about it. Overall, their car though was very solid. It was an excellent qualifier. It had the best 1 lap pace of any car in the field through the first half of the season. But their reliability was dodgy. Like I said, Rosberg had 3 mechanical retirements over the course of the season. Hamilton was driving with a broken chassis for a good few races. And they were probably the worst team in the field on their tyres over the course of the season. I mean, especially early on, Mercedes were absolutely struggling, always the first in the pits of the front runners to change their tyres. They would struggle, they would hit the cliff faster, and that's what would hold them back in races compared to guys like Red Bull, Ferrari, and during the second half of the year, Lotus as well, who seemed to get stronger as the season went on. And maybe if Lotus were a little bit luckier with, the Kimi Raikkonen situation and Romain Grosjean at the start, then maybe Lotus could have overtaken them in the end. But overall, it was still a really decent season for Mercedes. I think they were quite lucky to get second place, but I'm sure they'll take it because they could take the extra money they'll get from that and develop it into an even stronger car for next year, as well as building on the seasons of Hamilton and Rosberg. Overall, they had a really strong package. And, it's a shame that Tiger happened because it kind of puts an asterisk next to their season to a degree as well. But the whole, not missing the young driver test kind of worked out in their favour as well. So, depends how you want to look at it. But to me, I think Mercedes had a very solid year. They'll be looking to get even better next year and take the fight to Red Bull, maybe. We've got to wait and see.